Hello there, guys. Can you hear us?
Yeah, hello.
Hello, how are you guys? It's a pleasure to have you here in Nerdearla.
We're doing well.
Great.
All right.
Thank you.
So we basically what we did, we put your documentary, available in our platform. People have been watching them. I've watched it. We have a lot of questions. So this is more like a Q&A. It's like just a chat, to talk about a bit of everything. And we have a lot of questions here. So we can just get started. If you may, I will start with the first question that we have from the audience in Swapcard. Ezekiel reads, it says, Ezekiel read that Matthew Reiser, an engineer at Netscape, said that much of that time was a blur. How did you guys experience it?
I would say blur is generous. It was more like being perpetually on fire while running as fast as one could. I remember, when you saw Scott sleeping under the desk, that was a lot of people. His was just the most comfortable. And getting those meetings together, like we're still doomed. Listening to Jim and Lloyd realize, oh crap, how are we going to manage external commits? Because remember, this was the days before we had distributed revision control.
Yeah.
So it was like all of those challenges around the CBS server. Like it never stopped. Every time we solved the problem, there was 5 more to resolve. I don't know, Jim, Scott, what was your thoughts on that?
We knew we were in an interesting era. We were bringing out something which was, to us, we believed as significant as the printing press, reducing the recurring cost of printing. And so this was just a remarkable place to be. It was the hub of a revolution. And then and on top of that, we were in a little battle with a small company in Washington. And but the deal is, if you get to play in the Olympics on the world level, win or lose, it was just amazing to be there. That this company, as I say, in Seattle, knew about us, and so that was wild. And just each day was moving along, see what can be done, and it was exciting.
And I got to work with some of my best friends. I spent time with people that I really cared about and respected. And the work, while it might have been a blur, was a pleasure.
And I think talking about that's what I felt when I saw the documentary. It's like, I heard these stories before that when you go through such a hard time altogether, you get this bond like when you go to war, like what soldiers develop when they go to war. There's kind of, well, it was kind of like a war for you.
That you're kind of like playing, you're not working, you're playing. Even if you spend like entire days there, you have fun, even if it's super hard and super challenging, but still you feel that you're working with the rest of your friends and family, and it's not so bad. And then when you look like a couple of years ahead, it's, wow, this was hard.
No, there's a saying in life, if you love what you do, you'll never work a day in your life. And we're geeks, but Dave Winton might also have seen some joy. Maybe he can also comment on seeing this from the outside as we went through this.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I mean, I think everything everyone has said is absolutely true. I think it's important to realize, too, one of the things that really appealed to me about being there, I had just moved from New York City, where I had made similar films and TV commercials, and the environment of the East Coast versus California was an underlying theme of this film. And I arrived in California near Silicon Valley, lived in San Francisco, and I was absolutely dumbstruck by the essential joyfulness of Silicon Valley in the late 90s. I mean, it was palpable. You did not see anything like this anywhere in America, and certainly not on the East Coast, not on Wall Street, not in New Jersey where AT&T was located, or IBM. The difference in culture cannot be, can't be underestimated. And I think to some degree that culture still exists, but I think back then it was really far more palpable and seemed truly, extraordinary, if not even revolutionary. Will it come back like that? Probably not. It was that moment, but I felt it deeply.
I echo something Dave said, and I worked with Dave behind the scenes and wrote a book called Showstopper about the making of Windows NT at Microsoft that somewhat influenced Dave in our discussions about how to do this film. The biggest change to me, Dave, is the grip that these big software companies and big tech companies now have on their own employees. The ability in the 90s, when I was in Silicon Valley as well, it was very freewheeling. Employees had a lot of freedom, and it was possible for outsiders like us, I was a journalist for the Wall Street Journal then, Dave was a filmmaker, to mingle with frontline software workers, code writers, very creative, interesting people. That's all gone now. I mean, now there are companies like Google and Amazon and others that simply fire their employees who speak with the media or access the media in ways that are not approved. So the whole environment has changed, and it's very, very difficult to document, as Code Rush does so well, the real life of people in these positions.
The good news for us, though, is on the inside, we actually can talk and act and interact in a remarkable way. So yeah, I think it was remarkable that you folks got the access. But inside these companies, remarkable things happen. And remarkable interactions continue to happen out here.
And let me just answer Jim on that, because you're absolutely right. Many of these companies are too big, too powerful, and have too much at stake to be in a fishbowl. They have to have control, and that came with size. So I think it's absolutely true.
So what you're saying is, like, if we want to do something like Code Rush today, that cannot be done at the level that you guys documented it, right? Maybe amazing things are happening in some companies, but they just cannot talk about it.
Well, I would say that one of the key lessons of Code Rush is that the revolution can happen, but it is not going to happen in a place that is so established.
Right.
Where you do have those lockdowns, right? You know, the rest of industry finally caught up to high-tech industry, which is why companies like Google or Amazon or Apple, et cetera. But there's the new companies, the up-and-comers, and those are where the revolutions are going to happen again, just like they happened at Netscape. And those are where the opportunities to tell those stories are going to continue to happen, and as it should be, right? I think it's cyclical, right? Certain things become well established. The idea of the browser and the World Wide Web in the 90s was transformative, and now it is the basis for almost everything that we do. So technology in some interesting way.
Yeah.
Like,
Tara,
in a way, we won that battle. The next thing is going to be what we don't identify yet.
Yeah, I think what's interesting is that what Tara says is absolutely correct. You can find, there are lots of small companies, startup companies who are going to do great things that you can probably get inside, you can get access to, but nothing will ever be like getting access to Netscape, because as you all remember, Netscape in 1997, 98 was, really truly ground zero. That will never happen. And no company, no startup will, well, I shouldn't say that. Any startup that has the potential of being on that scale will not let you anywhere near them. You can get a marginal company for sure off on the side, but you will never get access like this. I was totally lucky in getting access to Netscape sort of during the sort of NDA era, because I had done a film about Netscape for the Wall Street Journal, and so I was sort of an approved insider, so to speak. Also, at the moment that we made the film, Netscape was in such peril, they had nothing to lose to allow full access. Had Netscape continued to succeed at a high level, I'm not sure that I would have had a chance, to be honest.
Well, and it wouldn't have been an interesting story.
Right.
I think it's,
Well, we didn't actually know how it was going to end. In fact, it still goes on today with Mozilla and spin-offs of Chrome, and then then the world keeps changing with robotics and ML changing the world. I mean, the revolution is accelerating, and it's
like,
really cool to be here.
It's like this documentary is the last dance for geeks. That's what I called it. You know.
That is beautiful.
It's the warm-up dance. It's the warm-up dance.
That's better. That's better. Yes.
So we've got another question from the audience. It reads, I love how at the end of your movie you said that this whole internet thing can easily turn into television with only a few people controlling what we see. This has become our current reality. Do you think that blockchain prevents censorship?
No.
Yeah. What was that? Yeah.
Blockchain is pretty, as a geek, blockchain is pretty tangential to that. I mean, blockchain has interesting impact on what they call fiat currency, you know,
Yeah.
people printing money. But no, it doesn't. But what you will see, I believe in my joke during this thing, by the way, was I believe in the invisible hand of the market, you know, and I said Microsoft will be smite down within 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 centuries from now. And I was wrong. You know, things change dramatically quickly. And that's what you have to realize, is that there are other companies now that are growing and will try, with the assistance of the market, to displace anyone who plays too unfairly. And I don't believe you can stop that from happening. And so I think that's where the world is going. And we can't even imagine what's going to happen tomorrow. You know, self-driving cars, kids, why should they bother to learn to drive? What a waste. You know? And then why should they bother to live in the cities? In fact, gee, with our commute, at first they were saying they're going to commute in the cars and then be on the browser the whole time because they don't have to look at the road. And now they're saying, why bother to commute? I'll just live far away and I'll telecommute.
Yeah.
And
With my parents.
yes.
Naturally.
We're not going to get too deep into that, Wolf. No, that's.
I have here from the audience, and I quote, "A must-ask question to Tara: why the hockey stick? Who will use it for today?"
Yeah, you know, the things that I did back in the day, I'd probably be arrested for now. But, you know, and the hockey stick actually wasn't even my best weapon.
So it was not a metaphor. It had a purpose.
I would hit people with it. I would knock things off with it. Okay, so this was before Dave came on board. And I don't know, Jim, I'm not sure if you were there yet. We were still on the Middlefield campus, the client engineering team, and we had an intern. And this isn't going to broadcast on live TV, right?
No.
So we had an intern, and something you have to understand about the early browser code is that it was written in the sort of the core of it was written by a bunch of college dropouts, and we had a global symbol table that was so large, if you're into this sort of thing, that we actually had custom compilers on some of our platforms.
Wow.
Because it would run out of heap space. And so there was a file, it was a header file, and we told the interns never touch this file. Right? If you touch this file, you break everything. And the intern touched it and broke everything, and we went and told him never touch that again. And he broke it again, and we're like, really, we mean it, do not touch this file again. Third time, I go in, and it wasn't the hockey stick, it was, there's a Japanese practice sword called a shinai. It's made out of bamboo.
Yes.
And when you hit somebody with it, it slaps, right?
Yes.
I went in there, I was so angry, I hadn't slept for days. I go in there and I just swing and I knock his computer monitor, his keyboard, this pile of Coke cans, everything onto the floor. And I said, if you touch that file again, I'm going to kill you. I literally said these words. Now, why I was not fired, I will never know. I was younger then.
Or did he learn the
I did not get fired. Yeah. Everybody just laughed because nobody else wanted this kid to touch the file either. So, but that was my job. Don't break the build.
Oh my
So
God.
we've got another question from the audience. Ali is asking, if you had the power to change history, what would be a new ending for Netscape?
Be careful what you wish when you change history, because you don't know how it turns out. We've seen too many sci-fi books
Well,
about this.
I mean, you changed history already, but I think she meant the story, of the documentary.
Let me take a crack at that. There was certainly a possibility the U.S. government could have intervened, restrained Microsoft, allowed Netscape to survive and thrive.
Uh-huh.
This would have been from the vantage point of today, more acceptable. At the time, it wasn't conceivable. But Microsoft engaged in predatory practices, a priori, pro forma. You must just accept that. Their predatory practices were wide-ranging. And Netscape was a victim of this. And it was a somewhat tragic story. And that's why Code Rush has, for people around the world, it's not a celebration of Americanness. It's not a celebration of inventiveness. It's rather the opposite. It's the story, it's a death saga. It's the story of how something was killed through environmental threats, and it's an existential drama, which gives it a lot of force.
I'm going to push, well, maybe. You could well be right. But I'm going to say I wouldn't change anything, and let me tell you why. Two really critical things happened to the larger industry because of how things went down. The first thing is we got a browser, which has turned out to be a fundamental technology to modern society, into an open source foundation, which has turned into a champion for things like net neutrality and standards and all that other stuff, that if Netscape...
And privacy.
And privacy, yes, thank God, Mitchell Baker, right? That made, you know, if Netscape had been more successful, you could imagine they would have tried to roll it back. They would have, this was corporate IP, let's try and undo what we did.
Right.
That was one thing. Second thing, and this one I think in some ways is even more profound, which is because of what we went through to get Mozilla out the door, because of the discussions that we had with Eric Raymond and arguments with Richard Stallman and like larger discussions around licensing and what does it mean to have enterprise plus free software at the time, you know, we evolved the idea of modern open source, right? That's when it really started. And because of that, Linux, like, you know, we can't take a direct correlation between Netscape and Linux, but there was a ton of things that happened in that process that inspired the Linux movement, which resulted in the creation of the Linux Foundation, which is probably one of the most powerful open source organizations in the world, right? And that has really driven a ton of innovation, creativity, has fundamentally changed how we think about software development and engagement, and that would not have happened if it hadn't gone down the way it did with Netscape, I feel.
And look at the follow-up with Chrome coming out of Google and the decision to make that open source. And then the open source allowing for things like Brave and other things to fork off of that. I mean, this remarkable mentality and awareness that this can actually work, companies can allow it and actually profit by it. And it's really an amazing change. So yeah, that's why I'm very nervous about changing anything when I look back at history. I would agree with Tara.
I think what did happen was the best outcome, honestly. As painful as it was. I mean, it hurt to see it go down. I bled Netscape blue. You know?
When my wife watches Code Rush, she says it's a tragedy. She says it's the dark story of our end. But when I watch it, it's heroes fighting a battle.
Yeah.
And
we precious few, we band of brothers.
Even if it ends badly, you actually need them to be there.
Yeah.
All right. And by the way, I love Brave. That's the browser that I use. I love that you loved it as well.
I use Mozilla, so.
Okay. So we have plenty of questions from the audience, so let me get through them as fast as I can. So next one says, why Opera and other browsers were forgotten through time? I mean, Opera is kind of alive. I mean, they have a new version now, but in terms of popularity, I think that's what they mean. Opera has been.
It's a meritocracy. If your browser isn't good enough, it's not gonna live.
Yeah.
Speed, performance, stability. Giant steps forward in Chrome. Just the fact that it went to multiple processes, so one would break. It used to be one little bug, the whole thing ended. What a terrible life that was, and that it all changed.
Those were dark days.
Those are dark days. In fact, we pushed for Mozilla to do that, and they didn't want to take the step, and that's part of what led to Chrome. So it's sort of interesting. And so, yes, I think it's a meritocracy is a very nice statement. That's the reality of the market. Even though we fear that it's being controlled, a meritocracy exists, and quality, a million little feet. That's the difference between the government deciding which browser we should use and people deciding with their feet and their hands and their downloading bandwidth.
And there's also, I think, this really interesting element. You can look at operating system the same way. OpenBSD and NetBSD, like the BSD ecosystem is still out there, right? But nobody uses it. Well, not very many people use it. And the other thing that I think is really interesting is if you know, Chrome currently, I think, is the current top browser, but if Google and that community pushes too many buttons, does too many dumb things, that correction, it's not even necessarily a market correction. The other companies, like, you know what, you're pissing us off too much. We can now use our muscle to throw our weight behind something else where the community is more engaged, right? And that is one of the really interesting things about this combination of open source plus enterprise. It's a way of companies kind of keeping each other honest, right? Google releasing Kubernetes is a great example. It's like nobody wanted Amazon to be the sole proprietor of how you manage this emerging container ecosystem and with fully proprietary tech stacks. Kubernetes was a way to equal the playing field, and now all of the vendors support some sort of Kubernetes engine. The industry decided that's, you know, we want to hold the line there. Other things, it doesn't matter as much, but it creates for this fascinating dynamic that I think is very unique still to tech industry versus other industries. You don't see this in, well, maybe you're starting to see it in healthcare. That's actually a whole nother conversation.
Yeah.
So who will be the next big player on browser wars in the next future? Do you have an idea?
We could make a lot of money if we could answer any of these psychic questions.
Yeah. Well, I think it's based on what you just said. Like, it's a meritocracy. It's performance, and the browser is what we use for mostly anything these days. It's what needs to work the best. But I have a question that I just come up with, and this is, I know this is like a bit uncomfortable, but you heard about these rumors from like Google optimizing pages to work on Chromium, you know, engines and not Firefox based. So there goes the performance, right? So who has the control over it? Is the website or is the browser? It's a combination of both.
I can't speak to that, but I can tell you one thing, going back to the Code Rush days. If you open up any browser, even now, you will often find a Mozilla string in the metadata.
Yep.
Yeah.
On the
Right?
user agent.
Right, and the reason for that is that in the early days with the servers, and by the way, the servers back then were largely proprietary as well as like the web services and whatnot. They would say, okay, well, we know that this will work better on one browser versus another, so we'll look to see if which browser is connecting to us. And somebody at Microsoft figured that out, and they're like, oh, well, okay, I know how to bypass that. And all of a sudden, IE started listing Mozilla in their metadata string, and it just kind of happened, right? So this idea of a company optimizing a particular browser is not new. This has been since day zero of the World Wide Web. And I think it probably still happens everywhere. I think, how many browsers and browser platforms are there? I mean, there's Chrome and Chrome OS and Android and Safari, and, you know, they're all, the potentials are everywhere.
And as you look closer, you realize in addition to browser, now you see applets on these phones, and they're competing to try to take over with a better user experience than what a browser can provide. The browsers are struggling to stay ahead, and where this is going to end, again, if I was psychic, I could make a lot more money than merely coding.
Okay. We have another question here. It says, how similar or different were the days of working in the 90s/2000s compared with today, like 20, maybe 30 years after?
Well, when we were working on Netscape, our audience was millions of people, and when you make a product for millions of people, there's a certain import to your work. You can feel the effect of what you're doing. And these days, I work at a company that teaches kids to read, and we have maybe a couple million, maybe in the multiple hundreds of thousands of students, but it's not the same as being the browser. So that is a huge difference between then and now.
When I used to work, although I felt that we were changing the world at Netscape, working at Google, working on Chrome, I worked to speed things up, and I'd save 50 milliseconds, tiny little fragments that no one could figure out. But then we were shipping to billions. And I would multiply the 50 milliseconds by a billion people, and we were calculating how many lives we were saving each day. And now playing at Amazon, I called, my daughter needed a book. And I said, oh, I got to go to the store. And I said, I'll just check to see where they have it. And Amazon said, would you like it tonight? And that saved me an hour. And now each of these things, so you do actually change the world. You expedite the world. You're helping children learn to read in ways that they couldn't before. But we're saving people time, allowing them to profit and grow all sorts of other industries. So it's pretty remarkable.
For me, yeah, no, agreed. I think for me, the biggest thing, and this is someone who's been a manager for, since Netscape, I never stopped. Netscape as a company, we made the decision that we were going to work ourselves to death. We were working 100-hour plus weeks.
That decision was made for me.
Yeah, well, I mean, we all made.
I wasn't there. I wasn't there on that day, so I must have not got the memo.
I've got a blank.
Yeah, I meant the corporation made a decision. We're going to work ourselves to death, and we all bought into it. We did it, right? That was probably the biggest, for myself personally, the biggest lesson I took away, which is I'm never doing that again, and I refuse to let that happen again, right? If a light day for me back then was a 80-hour week, right? That was a light day. Now I yell at my people, you've been here 50 hours, get out. There is no need, I think, to kill ourselves in the pursuit of these types of goals. My health was poor for years after that experience. Now, there's one thing, if you there's a thing and you're going to push for a couple of weeks, maybe you could convince me, but in the end of the day, to whose benefit ultimately is when you ask your employees to do stuff like that? It's certainly not the employee's benefit most cases.
It wasn't asking the employee. See, I didn't get that memo. I just came and I just enjoyed changing the world. And this was wonderful that a bunch of other people were working with me to change the world. So I didn't feel, I remember other friends, they make you work 60 hours a week. I wouldn't put up with that. I go, no, I'm getting to do stuff. I'm getting to change the world. So the same thing is true. It is still true today. When you join a startup with 5 or 10 people, every one of those people, there's a famous saying, no matter where you work, someone has to take out the garbage. You do whatever has to be done to cause that company to succeed. And this is, indeed, you didn't work yourself to death. You worked yourself to a comfortable retirement. You worked yourself to be able to be on the TV today. And this is what you were aiming for. You were going to change the world, and you knew there was rewards. And there were rewards, and there still are rewards today, I'd say.
Yeah.
But I'm going to push back on that for a little bit, just a second, Jim.
I don't work people to death, but I will say when they want to work, I make sure I support them in every way possible. And in fact, I specifically turned down. I remember one company. I'll not mention the name, but I interviewed with them years ago, and they said, we're looking for people who want to work 60 to 80 hours a week. And I said, well, I guess you should look for someone else. That was my answer to them. But it was funny. Then I went to work, and I worked probably over 80 hours a week. But I didn't like promising to work that. I work when I want to and when I'm passionate about it. And so the interesting challenge is to find win-win negotiations with employees who are excited about a topic. And then you're not slave driving. You're facilitating their ability. You're helping create heroes. You're making it possible for people to change the world. And it's not pain you're inflicting on them. I'm sorry that you felt bad at sometimes. Everyone feels bad at sometimes.
No. At the time, it made sense, right? But it's looking back, is we as a company picked an arbitrary date. We had to hit the date, and we killed our employees to hit it for an ambiguous outcome. Yet, I mean, were there great outcomes? Yes. Right? Can you change the world without that? I also believe that is to be yes. So that's the difference. The culture. It was the cultural element of that I objected to.
Might I just interject that work-life balance is now standard, and one of the reasons that perhaps software was such a male hegemonic experience in the 90s was because there was little sensitivity. Tara, what do you think? Is it more
everybody keeps saying that. Everybody keeps saying that. Let me tell you something. In the 80s and 90s, there were more women, for gender, There were more women in tech than there are today. It plummeted in the 2000s, but we went from like 37, 40% in technical roles.
Yeah.
Now,
That's true.
to something like 15%. And now we're back at I think the average is 30% for women across the industry, not just technical roles. And of course, the non-technical kind of makes up a bulk of that. So people keep telling me, oh, it was so bad, but it was better then. There were some stupendous women in the engineering organization at numbers that I have not seen since. I have not seen since.
Do you have any thoughts on why do you think might be that, like in the 2000s it plummeted?
I absolutely have opinions on this. Let's see if I can make Jim throw up on screen.
This is a safe space, so we're all friends here.
Right, here's what I think happened. And there have been some studies. In fact, there's been, I think Wall Street Journal, New York Times have talked about this. So what happened after Netscape and the lead up to the bubble, which was in 2001 when it popped the first time, was all of the guys who thought, ooh, I'm going to go into finance, or I'm going to go into law, and I'm going to, be on Park Avenue or Wall Street or whatever, realize there's money to be made in these IPOs. So they go into computer science, computer engineering. It was the introduction of programming culture, which did not exist, to my recollection, prior to that time. And that's, you still had things like in some companies there was kind of the booth babe mentality that had already started, but it got really gross in the 2000s. And it wasn't until we really as an industry started to look at that and started to invest in rebuilding more investments into having better representation both for gender and ethnicity and other non-traditional backgrounds that we started to see the recovery. But I was at a company that acquired another company that was famous for having a recruiting poster that actually literally said, "Come help us bro down on some code," right? It was the most toxic environment you could possibly imagine. And they had a 2% rate of women who were in technical roles at that company. Go figure. It was really bad for a while. So, Jim, you didn't throw up, but I'm sure you have opinions about this.
I work with the best possible people in the world when I get a chance, and I was fortunate enough to work with some wonderful people at Netscape, and I've been fortunate to work with some brilliant people at Google and at Amazon, and that's what I strive for. I don't pay as much attention to these secondary issues. I want to change the world, and I want to work. By the way, we're hiring, but I want to change the world and. See,
that's where you and I are different. I don't think it's a secondary issue, but that's my view, and not just for ethical reasons. Like there's a lot of studies that show that more diversity in employee base tends to lead to more positive financial outcomes. And I've been watching the Boston Consulting Group and McKinsey and some other research that talks about that. But yeah, circling back around, I think that you look at who made up the engineering organizations at Netscape. I think there was a much wider diversity and truly outstanding people. I will tell another funny story. So go ahead.
Sorry. No, go ahead, please.
I was just going to say, when I got to Google, I took over managing a team, and there was a guy on the team, a young man, and it turns out his dad was at Netscape as our chief scientist, and I'm like, you are kidding me. So that's when I knew at Netscape, I was the youngest person in engineering when I started. And now I'm the old person.
The same happened to me. So we've got a question from the audience. We're not sure if you've heard about the mate drinks. We think that one of you is drinking mate, maybe?
I tried it once. It's a little weird for me. I like coffee.
No, I think the wolf. The audience think that you're drinking mate. That's because you're sipping something from a straw. That's all.
No, just coffee.
Okay.
Pure Colombian.
So I have another question here from the audience. So, how long did the production of the documentary take in total? Did it take time between when it was finished and then when it finally screened for the first time? Like an average, they want to know how long did it take.
Well, I think it took about, all told, maybe a year to a year and a half, which is not atypical for something like this. to some degree, you know, you just go, you follow the bouncing ball until it lands somewhere interesting. And our timing was pretty impeccable, you know, to catch the company at this fulcrum. And we shot off and on for about I think off and on for about a year. The film doesn't really take, you know, the interesting thing is that the film doesn't really answer the big questions until after the source code is released and people are going through, you know, are continuing to go about their lives. And so that we stuck around, and then once it got sold, that obviously provided a nice ending. But I want to say one thing, that the film really couldn't have happened without Zach's book. You know, Showstopper was such an inspiration because it allowed, all of this kind of allowed us to reconsider the nature of work. And so what Jim says and what Tara and what Wolf say are actually all part of the same kind of mosaic around work in our modern life, which is, you know, it's nice to be able to live a balanced life, but there's no such thing. I mean, there is, but you make your choices. And I think the thing that I loved about everybody at Netscape, and including my own desire to make the film and make the commitment to spend the time to get it made, is that it's a sacrifice. And there's no, in the world of work, in the world of capitalism, maybe in the world of, you know, any other way of organizing ourselves socially, it's not possible to do anything it's really not going to be done in a measured way. Human beings are not measured entities. And that was the thing that I loved about Netscape, is that it channeled that energy in a way that, and I think this is true of market forces, overall, they kind of make things work out in a positive way. Not always, but a lot of, and so I don't know if that circles back to the question at hand, but you work a long time to make a documentary with no certain outcome, and we just got lucky on this one.
Let me add something to what David Winton said. David put an enormous amount of time into this film. He had an extraordinarily talented film editor that essentially stayed in the room, the editing room, 8 to 10 hours a day for weeks. You would visit this guy, and it was amazing, his capacity to make revisions. Dave Winton had high production values from a different era, not the era of today when people make documentaries with an iPhone. He had cinematic production values. As a result, he made revision after revision. It went on for months, and I had the pleasure sometimes of visiting. He has a beautiful studio at the old Presidio in San Francisco, and I would visit, and the attention to detail was extraordinary. The other thing David Winton did that I would salute him for, because in my Showstopper book, I donated to Stanford University the archives so people could look at the material of the Microsoft programmers I interviewed. Dave did something extraordinary, which was to place essentially in the public arena all of the outtakes, an enormous amount of material, so that someday people might be able to really understand how software is created. No question, the most important human creations today involve software or are software. And we will spend a lot of time as the world gets remade through software, understanding how software is created, how it gets created differently over time. And David Winton created, through his generosity in part and his good organization, a permanent record, a snapshot in time of how people were working. And I think David deserves a lot of credit for this. And in some ways, I'm very happy that people continue to look at the film, because it does teach you something about how these technologies are made. And I might just add that because you're an audience in South America, I have had an interest in software creation in Africa and around the world. And I know that there is a hunger in different places in the world for them to have their own Netscape, for the people around the world to generate their M-Pesas or whatever their individual stamp on the global software scene is. It is not always going to be a made in America phenomenon.
Mm-hmm.
Let me add one quick thing. All films, documentary films, are edited. They're created by editors, and the two editors on this, Mike Toomey and Stephanie Matura, deserve as much credit for how this thing turned out. I mean, the struggle when you shoot all this material, you know kind of what the bones of it are, but to execute it into a narrative form that keeps you interested takes amazing craftsmanship, and that's really an editor, not a director. Is kind of superfluous in a weird way and don't bear much credit for this. Is the editors really made the film work anyway, and frankly, we cast the film. I would say that Tara and Wolf and Jim and Jamie and all of the people that we filmed, Michael Toy, they make the film it is. They're engaging people, and it's producers are good. The best thing about making a film is casting, and that's kind of all that we
David, but you casted that film. We discussed some of the characters, but an extraordinary Michael Toy, who's not here, he's extraordinary. Tara is extraordinary. We did have some incredible personalities whose personalities were as interesting as the code problems, the software problems they were working on, and their candor and openness. And that wasn't an accident. Dave zeroed in on certain people that had both self-confidence and the willingness to expose themselves or share themselves with an audience. And some of that is Dave's demeanor. He's extremely calm and professional, and I think he put a lot of people at ease.
Well, I'm still sitting here with the idea that there are outtakes of us on the internet. I did not know that, and now I'm afraid.
I'm sorry, I'm the one to break it to you.
So we've got another question. It reads, Mozilla is today the biggest warrior against the internet's main giants, controlling all lives. So the prophecy was fulfilled. What's next? IoT?
Ooh, that's a whole different thing. I don't know.
This is an example. Yeah, it's an example of the. See, we don't even know where it's going. Is it Internet of all around your house, the smart house? Is it your smart car? Is it your smart lifestyle that we're working from home? Is it right now? Here we are on Zoom. 2 years ago, prior to the pandemic, this was, some people do Zoom, and it was getting a little bit more popular. Now everyone is Zooming. But gee, this is still not that great. I don't have the three-dimensional view of you. I can't zoom in automatically on the person that I want to see. I can't exchange on a blackboard and a whiteboard. How will these things come to pass? How will our lives become better? We can't even imagine. 200 years ago, I saw the radio. Why would anyone want to talk into a box and have millions of people hear it, and they can't even say anything back? What a waste. I mean, it goes on and on. People cannot foresee the future, so we're arrogant to imagine that we can. And instead we enjoy and we try to accelerate when someone is clever enough to see something different and make the change, and we find ways to help them.
And I agree 100%. I think that the other thing that's important is, as much as we are able, insofar as we are human and therefore fallible, can we learn from the wisdom of the experiences that we've had? Can we learn from the mistakes of the past so that we don't just make them in new ways? And history tells us that in most cases, no, we'll just remake those mistakes in new ways. But I think also the people who can figure out how to dodge those will also have, forwarded things in interesting ways as well. But yeah. It's an interesting problem. This is why futurists are so interesting.
Wolf, maybe Wolf is sitting here about to tell us what the future will hold. Are you going to tell us?
I feel great about the future we have right now, where nobody can touch me.
Okay.
You're going to be a sad man when you come out of lockdown, Wolf.
Okay, so I have another question here from the audience. It reads, and bear with me. What I don't understand, still in the beginning part, is why they couldn't release the source code in the beginning and let the community help them with the bug fixes.
That didn't happen in those days. Nobody knew how to do that.
How do you bundle it all up to give it away? And I think a large part, the memory, maybe I'm confused because I was sleepy, was removing the extensive profanity that might have been enclosed in the code.
That was me. I did that.
Were you the remover or the implanter? A little of both.
I was the remover.
Oh, okay. But
That's what taught me Python.
Right. So
It was, yeah. I mean, there was a little bit of that, and I still have the sheet. If you remember, someone produced a sheet. You know, they had like pound if def Lou as a pindic was one of the good ones. But it was also because we had proprietary code in there we didn't own, right? That was actually, I think, one of the.
So we're having strange things with the audio here. I wonder if we've lost them.
Can you still hear us?
Oh yeah, we can still hear you now.
Okay,
I'm
good.
sorry.
Uh-oh.
No, but that was one of the
We
great
can hear you, yeah.
themes in the documentary when you discover you've got to swap out this proprietary code. That was fascinating to me. And
Yeah, well, there was a lot of it.
very
There was
real.
honestly a lot of it, yeah.
And it was hard enough for us to build internally. I mean, to get your own system to build the code and put together something that ran took other people helping you until you finally knew how to do it yourself. And to expect the outside world to be able to do this from scratch just by looking at a package that they downloaded, inconceivable.
Right. That's why maybe it was so difficult, because it was such a new thing. Like, it's the first ever browser going to be open source, so no one knew besides you what was going on, right?
It was a giant body of code. And today we have these little, you learn with Linux. Oh, hit make and come back in 20 minutes and you've got the kernel. But the answer is people worked for years and years to evolve into that. And the answer is no, we were in such a rush to ship. Wolf, you build this, you build that. Okay, when you're done, call us up and we'll pull that in. And and you can't ship that to 1 million people because Tara isn't there with her stick to say, why didn't you give me this piece? Okay? And so it has to all be automated. It was automated, but there were a lot of helping hands. And to change that into something where you could just push the button, I think that was evidenced in the movie when Jamie just pushed it, and it all built. That was a remarkable state of being. We were not in there. In fact, the humorous thing is sometimes we break the build. It would take us a week to build. In fact, sometimes you would build tools, which were then tools that are used to build again. And if you lost them, you broke the loop. And suddenly you couldn't even build. It was impossible to build because you needed this tool to work to build this, that tool to build this, and that tool to build this. And if any of the old versions was not around, you were dead in the water.
There was a great example of that, actually. One of the principal engineers was, we were inventing the new technology, right? WYSIWYG editors, like the whole web mail, like all that stuff, right? So there was a new, I forget what it was called, like RTC, something like that. The engineer who invented it, he finished it up, he checked it into the tree, and he went to Fiji on vacation. He's like, I got my thing done, I'm gone, right? Well, turns out that the code was dependent on a service that was running on his personal workstation.
Oh my God.
And during the weeks that he was on vacation, the workstation gets powered off and the build breaks. And we had no corresponding commit to explain to us why was the build broken. It took us days. And this is why I carried weapons, right? But this was the kind of stuff that was happening internal, and not exactly the kind of stuff that could not happen if we're now giving our source code to the rest of the world. You couldn't do things like that.
That is the exact example of it works on my machine. So, yes.
I was so mad. I was mad for weeks.
Talking about feelings, I mean, and bear with me on this comparison. So I remember, I heard that, for example, when you train for a marathon, you train like a year, you run the marathon, and after you finished, some people like kind of get depressed, like what I'm going to do now. It's done. And did you get some kind of that feeling after that you push that button, it's okay, it's done. Now, what was the first week after that? Like, now what? Sleep?
It's like the Doritos ad, crunch all you want, we'll make more. There were bugs. There were an endless supply of bugs. So even though that now it was built, but now other people could find the bugs, and now comes the question of, I have 10,000 people all sending in bugs. Hold it. Who's answering the mail? Mind you, some of these people are 5-year-olds, and some of these are brilliant programmers, and separating the wheat from the chaff. And what should you do, and which one should you work on first? And then, of course, and then you have someone calling up and say, I have a security flaw. Please fix it. And we say, it takes us 2 weeks to build. And 1 week later, someone else says, I found another security flaw. And now you're asking yourself, well, do I ship the first one with 2 weeks? And the other person says, hold it. You said it would only take 2 weeks. What do you do? All these judgments. So no, the answer is it doesn't end when you ship. And the product, it feels great to ship, but the shipping is only the beginning. And then,
we never finished. It's not finished yet.
Right. That's
and you know, like I said, this is the days before Git and distributed version control systems. So you had the ability to submit a patch. So if you're a really awesome person, you create a bug and you submit a patch. But then someone would have to read the bug, validate the bug, try to apply the patch. Invariably, there's been changes. Now they have to fix the patch, right? It's actually an enormous amount of work that I don't think that we were prepared for at all. And then we had to learn how to do that. So
this evolved the whole open source system, you know, build systems.
Exactly.
In fact, the automated build system evolved during our tenure, and then it went on, and you see it in Mozilla, and you see it in Chrome. The progression, not to mention, I'm sure, what's going on with Linux and all these other systems. It's incredible. And again, automating things that individually we would handle until it was all down to the push of a button. And then someone, of course, breaks that, and then a lot of hands run in to try to salvage what went wrong.
But yeah, it was so many different layers. Like there was a guy that was hired, Tinderbox was our automated build system. There was a guy hired to Mozilla who was working on it, Paul Bigger. And he's like, God, this is a really cool thing. And then he went off and founded Circle CI, right, which was one of the first hosted continuous integration systems, right? So it was like, it wasn't just one thing. It was thing after thing after thing after thing, coming out of sort of the desperation of how the hell are we going to solve this problem? So now we're solving it on an industry-wide basis. And I think, to me, like I said, going back to that whole idea of the open source movement evolving, just this whole change in thought about how we approach the evolution of technology as a development process, right? It's just fascinating to me.
And I love that as a closing statement, like, it's not over, you know.
It's never over.
It's never done, right? So I think we are over. We are out of time, right?
Yes, it's been amazing to have you here. It's been a pleasure, an absolute pleasure to actually meet some of the people that actually build what we're actually doing every day of our lives.
Yeah.
So it's been amazing.
Yeah. And again, having the pleasure and sharing your thoughts with this community in Latin America, which is pretty big, and we're honored to have you here. And thanks for your time.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure.
Mucho gusto y muchas gracias.
Gracias, de nada.
Thanks for using our software and appreciating it and helping us change the world. Because you're the people who changed it.
Amen. Amen.
Great to see everybody, too. Jim, Wolf, Tara, Zach.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Dave.
Well done.
Bye. Bye, everybody.
Thanks again.
Bye-bye.
Everybody.